for their achievement. I believe that this is the way to go. I believe that our club is small at the moment, but as time goes on, many more countries will join our club.
Are you surprised, given that out of the 53 African Union member countries, that your club may not in fact be made up of more than 10 countries?
Well, I believe that we are in the growing process. Let's face it, Shaka. 10, 20 years ago, who talked about peaceful transition on the African continent? But as I said, there is a wind of change blowing. And many Africans have realized that democracy is the right choice to make. And therefore, as time goes on, you will find that more and more countries are beginning to adopt democracy as the chosen path. And I will tell you, within the next few years, you'll be seeing more and more people, more and more countries knocking at the doors of our clubhouse.
How do you respond to some people who will say, how can you really talk about democracy on the African continent when the chairman of the African Union, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, has been on record saying democracy is not good for Africa? That in fact what is needed is like a one-party state or a sort of no-party system that he has obviously used since 1969.
Clearly, Brother Gaddafi was speaking for himself. It was a personal statement he was making. It was an observation he was making. At that time, he did not purport to be speaking for the whole of Africa. And we hold views which will change with time. And I believe that with the coming into office, or with the experience which African countries are having and exhibiting, who knows, he may change his mind. But clearly, for majority of African nations, democracy is what they all want. And we want to carry along some of our people who, for some experiences or the other, have not been too favorable to adopting democracy. But who knows?
You recently attended, I suppose, your first, is it your first African Union summit in Libya?
Yes, it was my first.
What was the experience like? Because this is a club that a lot of people, a lot of critics at least say, is really a talking shop. And it is a club, some would say, of perhaps a new bleed, they say, a new bleed. These are their own words, not mine, Mr. President, of African dictators.
Well, you need to be there to be able to form an impression. And I felt honored to be there. But let me tell you, it's not a talking shop. There were very serious discussions. And I was really impressed by the level of discussions and by the determination of many of our colleagues. There were people who came to discuss issues on their merits. I think that if some years ago, people thought it was a talking shop, people thought it was an association of dictators, I want to tell them the position has changed. There are people who are there with democratic credentials. There are people who are deep thinkers, and there are people who go there hoping to achieve results for the betterment of the people who elected them into office.
Wait a minute, Mr. President. You had this very hot, very controversial issue in Libya, the issue of the International Criminal Court, which of course, as you know, has a warrant out for one of your colleagues, the president of Africa's largest nation, the Sudan, Omar al-Bashir. What about the fact that the OAU actually issued a statement saying that it would not cooperate with the ICC in as far as Omar al-Bashir is concerned? Were you party to that?
Let me say that this was an issue which was very, very hotly and very keenly debated. If you recall, Shaka, the OAU had an opportunity to comment on this at a previous meeting. But at this meeting, all kinds of views were expressed. But I think that the views expressed came from people who passionately believed that what they were saying was the best for Africa. At the end, we arrived at a decision by consensus. And let me say that when you belong to a group where you believe in democracy, the decision taken by the group is binding on you. Not that I dissented. We felt that the situation was different from other situations, but I believe that what swayed me in particular was the fact that we thought that we need a lasting solution for Darfur. And the president of Sudan, al-Bashir, is a major part of the solution. So that is why we call for postponement. That is why we express the view that with him out, it's going to be very difficult to get any solution in that country. We did that because we thought that was the best for Africa.
So what about Botswana, for example, which had a different point of view? Do you think that they were not doing it for Africa?
What I'm saying is that people try to be objective. When you have a group, you don't expect all of them to hold the same views. They express a minority view. But let me say that if you believe in democracy, when a group takes a decision, whether you voted for or against it, you are bound by it. Let us always accept it. Nobody is going to say that if the UN takes a decision, you can decide to do what you like, go against the decision because you were not in favor. Botswana expressed her views, were listened, but at the end of the day, there were many people who were not convinced by the reason advanced by Botswana, pure and simple.
How do you respond to some who will say that basically when it comes to that issue really, you were employing double standards? Because they say, when it comes to individual Africans, you have not been able to defend them against the ICC. We're talking about, for example, Jean-Pierre Bemba from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who is at the moment in The Hague. We're talking about a rebel leader from Uganda called Joseph Kony, who is on the run, and the ICC is looking for him, and all the governments would like to cooperate. But when it comes to one of your colleagues, you begin to shift goalposts, Mr. President. Aren't you really using double standards here? Because the African Union, unlike its predecessor, the OAU, was supposed to be people-centered, not leader-centered.
Shaka, to those who say that we are robots in court, that we wanted to defend one of our own, I believe that our decision shows that we have the power of discernment. We can distinguish between the various cases. We think that al-Bashir's case is not on all fours with the cases that you have excited. Here is a body which is able to look critically at the issue and say, we'll support this, but will not support that. If our decision really was that we are going to ignore all infractions of the law, then of course, we will consistently say, no, no, no. But if we distinguish, then it means that at least we have certain standards, certain parameters, certain yardstick to guide us, and at least give us credit that we don't always go one way.
Let's come to a member country of ECOWAS, the Economic Community for West African States, and that is Niger. You know that there are some undemocratic practices going on right there. There are efforts on the part of the incumbent president to shift to the constitutional political goalposts. Is that something that you find encouraging in as far as the democratization process on the continent is concerned?
Shaka, nobody has said that Africa is totally democratic. We are aspiring to democracy for the whole of Africa. There are challenges in some countries, and it is our hope that as time goes on, they will be able to learn from the experiences of others. Let me say that when Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, he knew what he was talking about. Very often, there is a temptation which many of us leaders cannot resist. To perpetuate yourself in power. Try and find ways of retaining the power that you have. So very often, we forget that power resides in the people. And it's the people who should decide who should rule them. Let us not forget this, especially in Africa.
What is it that when you are running again for office, really, you all appear or you all seem to be very genuine about your programs, about the things that you would like to do, about the fact that you would like to have an opportunity to serve your people. But when you get into that office, as you said, somehow you undergo several changes to the extent that you don't even mind treating your own people, people that you grew up with, as if in fact they were sharecroppers.
Well, Shaka, I would say that this observation that you have made is not far from the truth. In many cases, it's rather unfortunate that very often we develop amnesia when we get political power. I think it's important for us to always remember why we are in office. Now, let me also say that we are human beings. Human beings change. Sometimes also, before you obtain power, you may not be very conversant with all the facts of the case. You go into office hoping that there are certain conditions which are in existence. Then you realize that there are more challenges that, than what you had been told existed. So there's a combination of factors. But I believe that the bottom line really is this. Know that it's people who have put you there. If you forget about the people who've put you there, if you decide to distance yourself from the people, you cannot hope to retain power. I know that there are many examples in Africa that we are not proud of, but it is not the preserve of Africa. You go to other countries, even the developed ones, there are certain examples that we do not want to copy. In the developed countries, it took them ages for them to perfect their system of government. Now, they want us, to hop, step, and jump. Let us learn to crawl before we walk and run. There are challenges. They are not easy, especially in this globalized world. We are taking very important steps, and I believe that we should be allowed to make our mistakes, learn from the mistakes, and then move on, carrying our people with us. I would say that compared with the situation 20, 30 years ago, Africa has come a long way, and we'll move on.
I've heard that observation several times. What about India? Let's look at India. It gets independence back in 1947. It has really been democratic since then. Their democracy may not be perfect. They have never experienced any military coup. They hold periodical elections, frankly, which are credible, not these fake elections that are generally held across the continent.
I admire India. I think that their democracy has gained roots. But don't forget that in certain cases, blows are exchanged in parliament and all that. But these are all lessons that one must learn. But you cannot take it away from India. I think that this is because of the long practice. They have a tradition. Mm-hmm. And it's important that in Africa, we grow and nurture traditions which will guide us in our system of governance.
If you were to talk to us from the deepest, better part of the bottom of your heart and soul, can you pledge to the Ghanaian people that under no circumstances during your presidential tenure are you ever going to abuse the Ghanaian constitution and be tempted, for example, to engage in these constitutional political of shifting goalposts?
Shaka, let me tell you, you are 6 months too late. I swore that oath to the people of Ghana when I was sworn into office on the 7th of January this year. And I always remind myself of the very sacred obligation and vows that I've undertaken and made. Yes, this is something that I cannot ignore. Constitution guides us. And if you want to build a better Ghana, if you want to leave a legacy, the Constitution is the last thing that one should attempt to ignore or circumvent.
Do you have any specific role models, any people, any group of people, any individuals that inspired you, any particular person that provided you the shoulders to stand on so that you could see a little bit further?
Well, there are many people that I admire, but let me be partial. I learned a lot from my parents. Well, my mother, for example, used to tell me, if you are in a position to help somebody, do. My father always insisted on hard work, sacrifice, and telling the people the way it is. And they were my role models when they were alive. And very often, in my times of great difficulty, I go back, said, what would my father have done in these circumstances? Clearly, there are others who have impressed me along the line, but too many. I don't want to be invidious, but there are there.
Any political mentors?
Kwame Nkrumah was a political mentor. Yes, I admired him. He was a very selfless person. He had very serious challenges. And Ghanaians are beginning to appreciate what difficulties he confronted. There are some, but I believe that as we go on, I'll be able to identify them.